we start with the anatomy, just to remind ourselves about the nervous system. And we said before that the nervous system basically consists of the central nervous system, which has the brain and the spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, which has peripheral nerves. We have also cranial nerves. Those are the nerves that originate from the brain stem and the brain, and mainly supply the neck, the head and neck region. And then, of course, we talked about, you can see there the central nervous system consisting of the somatic sensory, that is from outside the body going to the nervous system, to the central nervous system. And of course, from the nervous system, from the central nervous system, we have the motor, that is the efferent. Yeah, we transmit impulses from the central nervous system to the effector organs, mainly muscles and even the glands. Of course, in the nervous system also you can have functional and classification, where you have somatic nervous system, which mainly control the voluntary nervous system, mostly motor innervation of all skeletal muscles. And then we have the autonomic nervous system, which mainly innervate the involuntary part. It could be motor innervation of smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and all glands, where we have the sympathetic division, which mobilizes the body system during emergency situation, the fight and flight. I think this one we did in Anatomy 1, in Anatomy 2. Then parasympathetic mostly conserves energy and promotes non-emergency functions, the rest and digest. And then, of course, the brain, we did look at it last time. The brain, what consists of. You can see they consist of the hemispheres, mostly will consist of the lobes. For example, we have the frontal lobe, parietal lobe, we have the occipital lobe, and you can see those are the structures that we have, including the brainstem, where we have the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. Then we have the cerebellum, where cerebellum mostly is concerned with balance. And then you can see the optic chiasma, basically as continuation to the optic nerve. Then, of course, meninges, the coverings of the brain. You know that after the skull, we have those coverings of the brain. The dura, for example, we have the dura mater. Immediately under the skull bone, we have the dura mater, which has an inner layer and an outer layer. And you see within that dura mater, we have superior sagittal venous sinus. So those are big veins within the brain, venous sinuses. And then we have venous arachnoid granulation. And you can see beneath that we have the arachnoid matter, where we have the subarachnoid space. And in that subarachnoid space is where we have the cerebrospinal fluid. And those arachnoid granulations basically enables the cerebrospinal fluid to be able to diffuse into the veins. That is how eventually the CSF, or cerebrospinal fluid, is able to get into the brain. So that in situations like, for example, meningitis, you can have this arachnoid granulation because they are being scarring and fibrosis and being blocked, so that the CSF doesn't flow into the veins. And so you end up with increased intracranial pressure in an adult. If it was in a child, then you end up developing hydrocephalus. And also below that, we have the pia mater, which is firmly attached to the brain. That is the pia mater. Those three are the coverings of the brain. They are called meninges. And of course, I'm sure many of us, we've heard about the condition, inflammation of the meninges, which is called meningitis. Again, just in the brain also we have ventricles. That is basically those spaces within the brain that are filled with cerebrospinal fluid. And we have 4 ventricles. We have 2 lateral ventricles, then we have a third ventricle, then we have a 4th ventricle. So we have 4 ventricles. We have 2 lateral ventricles and 1 third ventricle and a 4th ventricle. All those And then you can see the central canal of the spinal cord. So you can see the circulation of the CSF. And eventually we have them getting into the arachnoid granulation and getting into the venous system. So that circulation should be maintained. Otherwise, if it is blocked at any point, then in an adult will develop increased intracranial pressure. That is, the pressure within the brain will increase, and mostly they will present with headache. So there should be that circulation of the CSF. And you can see in another view, the B, looking at it from the A, you're looking at it from the lateral side, and then the B, you're looking at it from we'll say the coronal view. Yeah, those ventricles. And of course, we talked about the nervous system. We're looking at the cells, and I think that we talked about this in Anatomy 1, where we have neurons, and then we have the neuroglia, the glial cells. Basically, the glial cells mostly form the connective tissue. Of course, when you look at the microglia, that is mainly part of defense mechanism of the body. In the tissues, you have macrophages, and then in the brain, we have microglial cells, basically involved with defense mechanism. And then we have the neuroglia, which are mainly part of the connective tissue of the brain. We have the astrocytes, we have the oligodendrocytes, then we have ependymal cells. This one basically lines the ventricles and help produce the CSF within the brain. So those are the nervous system cells. And you can see a micrograph, an electromicrograph, and you can see some of those neurons and even glial cells are within the brain. And then, of course, the structure of the neuron, which we looked at in Anatomy 1, where we have a neuron consisting of dendrocytes. Those are the short processes. Then we have the cell body, which has a nucleus and even the other organelles. Then we have the axon hillock. Then it goes into the axon. And then we can have neurons that are myelinated. Yeah, and we talked about myelin last time, that one of the functions of myelin, it helps speed up the impulses. So even in conditions where there is demyelination, where the myelin is destroyed, you end up with a slowing of nerve impulses. And then, of course, we have nerves that are non-myelinated. Yeah, so, and you can see in that myelinated, there are what we call node of Ranvier. Node of Ranvier is places within the nerve axon where it is free from, there is no myelin. Yeah, and so that in itself helps with that fast process movement of the impulses. Again, just the arrangement of myelin. The A is you can see how myelin, that is myelinated. The A is myelinated, but if you look at B, this is non-myelinated, because as you can see, the cells there are not surrounded fully by the myelin sheath. And of course, you can see in C is a myelinated neuron with a node of Ranvier.